Please put these on so you can hear yourselves. Welcome everyone to our CoM SSA COP26 session in Glasgow, entitled Strengthening Multi-Level and Inclusive Governance for Climate Action, Messages from African Mayors for COP26. My name is Kirsty Griffin, and I work with the CoM SSA Secretariat, which is hosted by ICLEI Africa. Please use the hashtag African Voices at COP26. Please note, this is a hybrid event. We are live streaming, and everyone will be able to see the virtual housekeeping rules via the chat box on the screen. The Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa, or CoM SSA, is a European Union action that supports the external dimension of the European Green Deal. At the same time, CoM SSA moves to strengthen the African-EU partnership and supports Agenda 2063 of the African Union Commission. CoM SSA is co-funded by the European Commission, GIZ, and ACID, and our sincere thanks go to all of you in making this session possible. CoM SSA is a major catalyst for local climate action in the region, with political commitment from over 250 local governments. One of the main objectives of CoM SSA is to support subnational and local governments in the provision of and transition to sustainable energy access, and in furthering their climate change journeys. The CoM SSA Technical Help Desk provides technical support in the fields of sustainable energy access and in furthering their climate change objectives. Our support covers the entire journey from the development of baseline studies, such as greenhouse gas emissions inventories, risk and vulnerability assessments, and access to energy assessments, target setting and action planning, and a project conceptualization, prioritization, and early stage development. This session will provide the opportunity for African mayors to engage in discussions with African negotiators, the European Commission, and key members of the LGMA around the expected outcomes of the negotiations at COP26 and the implications for cities in Africa. It is our sincere hope that we will be able to show just how important initiatives such as CoM SSA are in ensuring local climate initiatives are amplified at the international level and show the enormous progress African cities are making in tackling the climate crisis. Owing to COVID-19, it is unfortunate that some representatives from our African cities were unable to join us today in person for this event. Nonetheless, we strongly believe in making this event as inclusive as possible, which is why some of our speakers today will be participating virtually, as well as via some pre-recorded messages. We are absolutely privileged to have with us today a prestigious panel of mayors, local leaders, and high-level representatives of organizations who will reflect on their key messages for COP26 from an African perspective. Without further ado, please allow me to hand the floor over to Mr. Stefano Signore, Head of Unit at the European Commission, to officially open our session. Mr. Signore, open to you.
Thank you, Shi, and distinguished guests and friends, ladies and gentlemen. We are here at COP26, a milestone for the climate action worldwide and a critical moment for cities in Africa. Unfortunately, many mayors were not able to attend COP26 in person due to the ongoing COVID-19 crisis that they are facing in their respective cities. And that is why it is critical to hear from them, to hear from the African cities who have made commitments through the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa. The focus on African cities is especially important as these messages will be carried forward to COP27, which will be hosted, as we know, in Africa next year. Let me spend a few words on the origin of this project. Covenant of Mayors for Sub-Saharan Africa was initiated in 2015 by the European Union, and it is the Sub-Saharan Africa regional chapter of the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy. The Global Covenant is the largest global alliance of cities committed to local climate and energy action, with over 1 billion people represented worldwide, including close to 140 million people in Sub-Saharan Africa. This covenant is funded by the European Union, by the German Ministry for Economic Development and Cooperation, BMZ, and the Spanish Agency for International Development Cooperation, AICID, in a Team Europe spirit. In this COP, many of us want to underline the importance of adaptation to climate change, and this represents an opportunity to recognize and address the unique needs of African cities. Adaptation projects and building climate resilient infrastructure are essential for Africa to prevent further loss of livelihoods due to extreme climate events such as cyclones, droughts, and flooding. Under the Covenant, 268 cities have already made a political commitment to implement climate and energy actions in their communities and agree on a long-term vision to address three main challenges: access to sustainable energy, climate change mitigation, and adaptation. Many of these cities are already taking action by completing a Sustainable Energy Access and Climate Action Plan, SEACAPS, and prioritizing efforts that increase their resilience and adaptive capacity to the changes faced, supporting low-emission development initiatives, and ensuring access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy. Against this background, urban public planning is key. Mitigation and adaptation should be seen as an integral part of the wider urban planning and the prioritization of sustainable urban infrastructure. The continued massive urban expansion means that the vast majority of the needed urban infrastructure by 2050 has not been built yet. This provides a challenge and an opportunity for better integrating climate considerations prior to putting this infrastructure in place. Can cities be better prepared for a low carbon mobility? How will cities expansion shape the need for investments in adaptation and resilient infrastructure? The potential saving in avoiding locking cities into unsustainable patterns are very significant. Multi-level governance and inclusive approaches are necessary for both cities and countries to achieve their climate target. This includes mobilizing climate finance resources so that local and national governments can work together to increase their ambition and implement tangible climate action. Beyond accesses climate finance, new revenue sources must be found. One area that we see as relevant to further explore is land value capture. Provision of urban infrastructure increases land values that could contribute to climate finance expansions. Therefore, it is important to plan and design such measures upfront. In response to the needs of the Covenant of Mayor signatories, the European Union has been moving its focus from planning to implementation and unlocking climate finance at the local level through the work of the European partners implementing the initiatives. It is key to have clear and specific actions in the SEACAPS, as this makes it easier to take these plans forward to the implementation phase. Ensuring climate consideration are embedded in all city planning policies, not just in standing alone climate action plans, is crucial to ensuring resilient and sustainable development. The Covenant equips cities to transition from climate planning to implementable action, and this ensures that they have more capacity to work with their regional and national governments throughout their climate action. The Covenant of Mayors has already supported 13 SEACAPS that are near finalization, and 611 city officials have received training in 38 initiatives. Cities and mayors are also at the core of many new country programs that will be financed by the European Union for the period 21-27. Cities as providers of basic services, water, sanitation, resilient cities that are planned for population growth, with safe housing that can resist the effect of climate change, cities that provide jobs. On top of the Covenant of Mayors, the EU has several other ways to deliver on the urban agenda. The European Fund for Sustainable Development mixes loans from Development Bank with guarantees to finance the much needed infrastructure. The Partnerships for Sustainable Cities program that has created 42 partnerships between local authorities and EU cities through call for proposal. And also the multi-country programs such as the Participatory Slum Upgrading Program with UN Habitat that supports slum upgrading to community-based support schemes, and the Mobilize Your City initiative with GIZ and AFD to support cities in defining sustainable urban mobility plans and funding them. The EU is also working with its partners on increasing the global knowledge about cities, how to engage with them, how to finance them, how to take into account the role of secondary cities, always with the climate agenda as a primary concern. Mayors are therefore essential interlocutors. To address these challenges, action are needed by both cities, authorities, and national government, involving a range of other stakeholders. This is why I very much welcome today's focus on multi-level governance. And I would begin to hear how the invited mayors see these challenges and opportunities of addressing climate mitigation and adaptation in their cities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Signore, for those insightful words. And I think what you're saying right now is exactly where we're going to go next. Our speakers that follow have been asked to speak about the importance of local government in addressing climate change and their journeys in developing their SEACAPS. I will now hand over the floor to our first intervention from Mali. Please allow me to hand over to the first Deputy Mayor of Bamako, Madame Kamara Fatimata. Deputy Mayor, over to you.
Merci, bonjour à tous. Merci de m'avoir donné l'opportunité de partager un peu l'expérience de Bamako dans le cadre de la Convention des maires. Le district de Bamako est membre de la CoM SSA depuis juin 2019. Je profite donc de cette occasion pour adresser mes sincères remerciements aux donateurs de la CoM SSA, à savoir l'Union européenne, le ministère fédéral allemand de la coopération économique et du développement et l'Agence espagnole de coopération internationale pour le développement. En effet, en juillet 2021, le district de Bamako, en collaboration avec Expertise France et l'Agence régionale de développement de Bamako, l'ADR, a officiellement lancé l'élaboration de son plan d'action pour l'accès à l'énergie durable et le climat, SEACAPS. Ce lancement fait suite à la réalisation d'études de référence territoriales qui constituent la base de la définition des priorités stratégiques de la ville en matière d'énergie et de climat. Bamako entre maintenant dans la phase de définition des objectifs de développement de son SEACAPS. Toutes les conditions sont aujourd'hui réunies pour permettre à la ville de Bamako de s'inscrire durablement dans une stratégie intégrant les enjeux climat à l'horizon 2030. Grâce à cet appui précieux, nous pourrons planifier des actions climatiques pour atteindre les objectifs souhaités en matière de réduction des émissions et des accès à l'énergie. Les experts, sur la base d'une collecte de données de proximité, auprès de sources officielles et d'échanges avec les populations, ont ainsi pu démontrer certaines caractéristiques climat-énergie. La ville de Bamako, sur la base d'analyses et de projections, ils ont aussi proposé des scénarios à l'horizon 2030 montrant la trajectoire de la ville selon le niveau d'effort qui sera réalisé. L'inventaire des gaz à effet de serre montre par exemple que les émissions proviennent en majorité des transports pour 56%, dont 62% fret et 38% passagers, prouvant l'urgence d'agir sur ce secteur via des moyens de transport moins émetteurs et une fluidification du trafic, passant notamment par les transports en commun et l'interdiction du centre-ville aux poids lourds. Le transport et le résidentiel sont aussi les principaux secteurs consommateurs d'énergie. Énergie elle-même d'origine principalement fossile, charbon, diesel, bois, pétrole, etc., afin de limiter sa dépendance aux importations et d'améliorer sa qualité de l'air. Bamako devra donc promouvoir l'utilisation des énergies renouvelables et les économies d'énergie, efficacité énergétique des bâtiments, éclairage public et des foyers améliorés pour réduire la pression sur les forêts. L'analyse des risques et vulnérabilités au changement climatique s'est quant à elle intéressée aux caractéristiques socio-économiques des 6 communes composant le district Bamako, ainsi que des risques auxquels les habitants font face, évolution des températures, de la pluviométrie, fréquence des événements extrêmes, ainsi que leurs conséquences sur les différentes couches de la population. La mairie de Bamako devra ainsi donc travailler sur la prévention des risques climatiques, l'amélioration de la qualité des services de base et le renforcement des capacités d'adaptation. Il est à noter que le résultat de ces travaux coïncide avec la révision de la contribution déterminée nationale CDN du Mali dans le cadre de l'accord de Paris et que les acteurs nationaux confirment l'importance de la territorialisation de ces objectifs et du rôle des collectivités territoriales dans leurs efforts de mise en œuvre et remontée d'informations pour les atteindre. Sur la base de ces éléments chiffrés et démontrés, la ville de Bamako débute ainsi un processus de consultation des parties prenantes qui lui permettra d'identifier les actions et projets prioritaires qui constitueront le PAEDEC et permettront en cohérence avec les plans de développement économique, socio et culturel PDSEC en cours de révision, de mobiliser les financements nécessaires à leur réalisation. Des ateliers de formation et sensibilisation ainsi que les projets pilotes illustrant le champ des possibles compléteront les activités de la mairie du district Bamako. La volonté politique au niveau local est affirmée pour lutter efficacement contre les changements climatiques et améliorer l'accès à une énergie durable et abordable pour les habitants. Aussi, je tiens à vous informer que la ville de Bamako fait partie des 13 villes qui sont dans ce projet. Et Bamako est la première ville à bénéficier de l'appui de CoM SSA pour l'élaboration de son plan climat. Après Bamako, Ségou est aussi dans la dynamique. Le plan climat de Bamako a connu une évolution significative. Nous avons mis en place des comités de pilotage et comités techniques pour la gouvernance. Aujourd'hui, l'étude diagnostique de base, les études sont terminées. Elles portent sur 3 points, à savoir l'adaptation, l'atténuation et l'accès à l'énergie. Nous avons donc recruté pour ce faire une équipe de consultants pour l'élaboration du plan sur la base de ces études. Le consultant travaille donc avec tous les acteurs locaux dont l'implication est nécessaire à travers le comité de pilotage et le comité technique. Je vous remercie.
Merci, Madame. Deputy Mayor of Bamako, thank you so much for your interventions there. We are now going to move to our virtual audience where we have 135 people joining us from online from across the African continent. We will start off with a pre-recorded message from the Lord Mayor Arias Lukwago from Kampala in Uganda. And we're now going to be seeing him on the screen very shortly.
I bring you warm greetings from Kampala, from Uganda, East Africa, within this region. And I would like to take this opportunity to salute all of you, dear participants from all walks of life. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the government of UK for the support they have given to this very important event and for accepting to host it, and also the development partners who have made it possible for this event to take place. I really commend you and I thank you very much on behalf of the people of Kampala, the great city of Uganda. It's my pleasure to note and inform you that this year, as a city, we hosted the Africa Climate Week. And it was such a great experience to us because it offered us an opportunity to share experiences, to share ideas, and to remind ourselves of this challenge we have faced, the global challenge of climate change, and particularly our collective efforts and collective challenges, common challenges rather. It was such a great occasion and event for us, and it was a learning experience. We made the commitments and underscored the need to finance our individual programs, which are city-based, where we are faced with lots of challenges. The biggest challenge we noted and we still observe is the capital market failure, because many cities have got little capacity to generate revenue, even when it comes to getting funding from development partners. Some are not credit worthy, some do not have capacity to absorb the finance given, and so on and so forth. And this is a critical challenge to all of us. We have commitments we have made because the IL deals we have in the Paris Agreement, the Agenda 2030, that is the SDGs and whatnot, all these commitments we have made under different protocols and instruments will remain on paper unless we take concrete and serious action as humanity, as cities and as governments and entities. That is a commitment we have made to ourselves. And as a city, we developed with the assistance of various development partners, and we are grateful to them for the support they have given us. We have developed a number of laudable programs to deal with this global challenge. We have the Kampala Climate Change Action Plan, which was designed way back in 2016. And right now we are at implementation stage. We have developed a number of bankable projects, which await facilitation from different partners so far. There are those who have come on board, they have given us commendable assistance, which we really appreciate. And I don't have time to list all of them, but we really appreciate the support that has been given to us, because the commitment we made of reducing global warming to at least 2% degrees. And also as a city, our commitment of reducing gaseous emissions 2022, roughly 22, we were working towards achieving that. Of course, our contribution to this challenge may be insignificant, but we also have that obligation. We have also, as a city, installed the air quality monitoring system. We have got emission inventories, and we are collecting this information to inform our different projects we are coming up with and instruments, because we want to have a robust regulatory framework to guide our programs in dealing with this challenge. So we have collected this data from all these installations we have made, and right now we are in the processes of developing different bankable projects, including building capacity to raise revenue. And we shall need a lot of support from all of you, the participants, different partners, and development agencies, towards implementing the programs we have designed in line with the Agenda 2030, in line with the Paris Agreement, and in line with so many other things that we have prepared. Because it's a whole chain from waste management, green cover, to also stretches to clean energy, renewable energy, all sorts of different programs in those areas that are geared towards reducing gaseous emissions and also controlling the excesses of climate change. But the key target is adaptation and build capacity to be resilient. It's about resilience and adaptation. That is the key theme in all the programs we have designed in line with Kampala Climate Action Plan, as well as those international protocols I've mentioned, specifically the Paris Agreement. Climate adaptation and resilience are key priorities for African cities, which are facing unprecedented climate change impacts. In order for us to realize the ideals of Paris Agreement and also Agenda 2030, a considerable amount of resources is required to be injected in these programs to address this pathetic situation. It's therefore imperative that COP26 identifies and defines modalities of raising the required funds to finance available bankable projects to deal with this very, very critical challenge. Otherwise, we really appreciate all the support you have given us. We wish you fruitful deliberations and welcome all the support that is geared towards boosting our efforts to fighting this global challenge. Together we shall overcome it. Together we shall make it. Let's remain in solidarity. Let's work in concert as a team, us assisting one another, sharing experiences, sharing good practices, and also sharing resources. That's the only way we can deal with this global challenge.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. So we're going to stay on the virtual side of things for the moment, and we have another pre-recorded message from the Mayor Rohoi Malik Low from Banjul. I'd like to go ahead to our virtual screen again to have our Mayor from the Gambia join us.
Good afternoon from the capital city of the Gambia, Banjul. I am Rohoi Malik Low, the Lord Mayor of Banjul, the President of African Capital Cities Sustainability Forum, Executive Member, Global Parliament of Mayors, President of Rafela, and indeed the second Vice President of the United Democratic Party. Distinguished and esteemed guests, Your Excellencies, partner organizations, colleagues, friends, all protocols respectfully observed. I would like to begin by thanking the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa Secretariat and the GIZ for organizing this session in this very important event of the COP26. First of all, I am pleased to see that countries have progressed with the revision of their NDCs, and this is fundamental because climate change is here and it is very real. African cities, especially sub-Saharan belt, are already experiencing the negative impacts of the greatest environmental threat facing the world today. Climate change and its effects are set to increase in severity and frequency in the coming decades. However, by 2050, the continent's urban population will triple. This will mean that more people will be more exposed to the adverse effects of climate change. The combined effects of climate change and the booming urbanization will create the already tremendous challenges to our cities, which have difficulties to provide basic infrastructure and services to citizens, including ensuring access to affordable, reliable, and sustainable energy for all. Notwithstanding the challenges and the solutions in our cities, and can be harnessed to mitigate the adverse effects of climate change. Indeed, Africa's urban transition is an opportunity to create new social, economic, and environmental development models and startups. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that the future of Africa lies in its cities. Our cities can be a breeding ground for innovation and champion the African transition towards a just, low-emission, climate-resilient, and energy-secured future for all, thus contributing to the limitation of the global heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius target of the Paris Agreement. As African mayors, we have a range of executive powers, which I am convinced can be used for the implementation of policies to reduce greenhouse gases emission and make our cities more resilient to the adverse effects of climate change. We don't have to wait for national governments or a new global climate agreement to act. We can do it, and we should do it for our citizens and the generation to come. This is why I believe that African cities can greatly benefit from the Covenant of Mayors in sub-Saharan Africa. My city, Banjul, is proud to be a member of the network, along with more than 260 other cities from the continent. The CoM SSA initiative is therefore the largest network of cities committing to tackling climate change and achieving universal access to a safe and affordable energy to bring prosperity to our communities on the African continent.
This brings us to an end of our pre-recorded messages for the moment, and we're now going to return back to the live event. So next over, I'd like to hand the floor to Mr. Salman Arimba, who's representing the governor of Kisumu County in Kenya. Mr. Arimba, over to you.
Thank you so much, moderator. And I would want to say that my name is Salman Arimba. I'm the County Executive Committee member, Kisumu County, in charge of water, environment, natural resources, and climate change. I want to say I'm happy to be here on behalf of the governor of the County of Kisumu, who I'm able to represent on this discussion. I want to believe that as I represent him and I look at the issues surrounding climate change within the local governments of African countries, we bear the biggest burden, as much as we are the ones who contribute close to less than 2% of climate change issues. One of the issues that we need to address is that as African countries, we face the biggest burden, and we must be able to stand up and get support and move swiftly to create resilience, have actions that will be able to support our communities against impacts of climate change. Allow me to just to introduce what Kisumu is. Kisumu is the capital, the third largest capital city in Kenya, in the western part of the country, inhabited by a population of close to 1.3 million people, as per the census done in 2009. In Kisumu County, within the last 3 years, we have been supported by Covenant of Mayors initiative through the consultants of expertise France to be able to do a program called Sustainable Energy and Climate Action Plan. And within this program, we have been able so far to have a baseline data emission of carbon and energy access by community members. And we have been able to do that inventory, and we have the data. This data is helping us to align ourselves to the policy and the act so that we can be able to deal conclusively with the issue of carbon emission. We are also able to do with the support of Covenant of Mayors initiative funded by the European Union. We have been able to do vulnerability assessment and take responsibility to know what is the access to energy by community members within Kisumu County. This has also helped us to set clear strategies and the policy and act that can be able to guide us as a county so that we can be able to mitigate on climate change issues. It is important to note that these studies have helped Kisumu County, and it is one of the first studies which we have actually done towards knowing exactly how we can be able to plan and have proper actions for our city and county. Through this program, we have been able to capacity build the representatives of the community members at the county assembly. We have been able to capacity build the executive members, those are the policy makers and the implementers of the programs. And also on governance issues, we have been able to capacity build and train community members, starting from the ward level. The ward level is the smallest unit of administration within the city and within the county. What are the actions which we have taken? To meet our desired objectives of reducing emissions and increasing energy access, we have been able to bring all the stakeholders together to discuss ways and means of reducing emissions. We have been able to bring stakeholders together and sensitize the community members of using green energy as opposed to charcoal and wood as sources of energy. As a county, we are increasingly moving towards a Free Cities conference, which will be held in Kisumu next year in the month of May. And we must be able to make Kisumu as a county and as a city a clean energy because a clean city because we are a signatory to the Covenant of Mayors for local government sustainability, so that whatever we can be able to achieve, we can be able to do that with the support of the partners and with the support of the national government. During the COVID-19, we have been able to access funding instruments to mobilize climate finance, which has remained a barrier to our actions at the local level. However, we have designed collaborations and partnership through the coordinations at the two levels of government, because we have the national government and the local governments, so that we can engage the international partners and organizations and stakeholders so that we can be able to increase our success towards climate financing mechanisms and facilitation. I also want to say that through the Covenant of Mayors, we have been able, as a county government, to put in early actions towards mitigation and resilience creation. And some of the programs which we have put in place is tree planting to help us on reduction of carbon sink. We have put in programs of early warning systems to inform our people on issues and changes within the climate impact, like flooding, lake levels rising, which has actually impoverished our people, because when the lake levels rise, people are displaced from where they used to be. So these are attempts which we have put in place given the impacts of climate change. So when lake levels have risen, our people are forced to come out from where they've been staying, and they lose their livelihoods and properties. So these are areas where we must be able to have programs to have early action warning systems so that we can be able to inform them accordingly in time. We have also managed as a city and as a county to form climate change units, starting from the village level to the county level, so that the programs of climate change in nature, the adaptation and the mitigation and resilience creation can be able to be upscaled at the village level for equity purposes. I want to say that as I had the opportunity to come here, most local governments within the sub-Saharan Africa could not be able to travel to be part of this discussion. And I know that because of issues ranging from COVID-19 to lack of funding are some of the areas where we need to put a lot of emphasis and encourage the Covenant of Mayors to engage more with the global organizations and stakeholders for more funding so that we can be able to move the campaign of resilience, climate change resilience, and carbon emission towards zero. I want to conclude by saying that the message we had was more important, that I had to be given an opportunity to travel here to share with you what we are doing, our focus, and where we want to go, and how we want to create a city that is resilient to climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rimba. I think we can all agree that from these interventions that we've seen, that CoMSA plays a huge role in representing African cities in the world in terms of their climate change actions and their planning. As we've heard from these speakers today, CoMSA allows our cities in Africa to develop a baseline so they can understand what are the risks that they're facing and where their greenhouse gas emission sources are coming from, where to set targets, and where to set those early actions to reduce significant impacts long term. Before we open the floor for discussion, I would like to welcome Mr. Kamal Jemui, the Special Advisor to the Chair of the African Group of Negotiators, and also the Country Relations Manager for the R20 Foundation for Climate Development. I'd like to hand over to you, sir, now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for inviting the African group to participate with you, with the local communities, local mayors, the cities, and on climate issues. Some may see that what we are doing as negotiators and what you are doing or what are your needs at local level may be quite different or something like that. But let me assure you on behalf of the All African Group of Climate Negotiators that what we are trying to negotiate is essentially that to respond to your needs, to respond to what you are expressing as needs at local level, be it for municipalities, for cities, for local communities. But as you may see that, and it was already mentioned by you, by the mayors of from Uganda, from Gambia, that the priority is adaptation and resilience, and to access to means to how to respond to the needs for adaptation and resilience. And of course, you all know, and we all know that Africa, and you mentioned it, is the less emitter of emissions, GHG emissions. And this puts Africa needs or Africa requirements, in particular at the local level, at risk to be funded, to be financed, and to be taken into consideration. Adaptation for local communities, municipalities, and cities means for the investors, for those that can provide funding and support. This means that what we are doing is essentially participating and funding local development. And this is what you need at a local level. However, local development doesn't always mean that there is GHG emissions reduction. It's not always meaning that there will be mitigation action. Well, what we are doing in the negotiation is try to find a way how to allow to all those that are in need to access to climate finance. However, in many situations, this access to climate finance has two ways to be done. The first way is when it's provided as grants and it's becoming less and less. And the other way, when it's mobilized through investors, be it public or private ones. And here, I think the main important issue for our local communities, municipalities, and cities is how to avoid to be indebted through trying to solve or trying to respond to adaptation and resilience need. Under the negotiations, there is also programs and initiatives, such as the Nairobi Work Program, that can help a lot the local communities. There is other initiatives that can be very beneficial for our local communities and municipalities. We also know that all those programs are not sufficient and not enough. And we need really to see how we can have some coordination between cities' needs and what is being negotiated on the different issues, be it mitigation, adaptation, or the means of implementation, access to finance, access to technology, and capacity building. I thank you, and this was what I wanted to share with you.
Thank you, sir, for those wise words, and super interesting to hear everything from your perspective as well. It's very interesting. Earlier on, Mr. Salman Arimba was talking about the lack of inclusivity and how difficult it's been for our African city members to join us today. And one of the ways, as I mentioned earlier, we've been trying to do this is to have people join us online, either through pre-recorded interventions or virtually. And I'm very excited to say that the Mayor Manuel Diarjo from Kilimani wanted to be here today, hence our seat here, but he has been able to join us online after all. So I'd like to go over to the Mayor of Kilimani, who will now share his insights of the lessons learned from working with CoM SSA. Over to you.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for inviting me to join this community of mayors, but also of other activists working towards a better world, a world where the environment is a priority because the environment will determine our future. Quelimane City is the capital city of Zambezia province with about 400,000 inhabitants. And we have been very active, not only in Mozambique, but in Africa and in the world. Quelimane is part of the executive committee of ICLEI, but also we are members of this organization and also of UCLG. And we have been learning a lot because this organization has been one of the prime platforms that gives voices not only to mayors, but also to local government officials. Through this institution, we have been able of sharing our experiences, of also bringing to the international platform to bring our challenges, the difficulties we face on our daily basis to deal with climate change challenges. Indeed, this institution has been organizing meetings, providing support, but also training to local officials. Because one of the biggest challenges that local governments do face is lack of capacity. So in terms of human resources, to be able not only of understanding, but also of designing programs and the projects in order to access the institutional fundings that are available. We are aware that there are many institutions willing to fund adaptation and mitigation work. But as my predecessor mentioned, most of the countries in the South, in the global South, are really concentrated on adaptation measures. But what really we live and we experience in most local governments in the global South is that there is a lack of trained people who are able of translating the challenges that the global South face into the language of the financial institutions. And most of the financial institutions also are not capacitated to understand the challenges that local governments do face. So this institution has been really working to diminish the gap between demand and supply of resources in the global South. We have been also able of engaging with the other cities through this organization. So through a sister city partnership, we have been able of exchanging ideas, learning from others about what not to do, and also in preventing committing the same mistakes that other cities may have committed in their process of dealing with environmental and climate change issues. So the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa has been an important instrument in raising awareness for local governments and also in giving voice to mayors to bring not only to the African platform, but actually to the global audience, such as COP and the other international meetings dealing with climate change. So we look forward to continue in working and being a member of the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa, but also to open our doors for cooperation with other institutions willing to improve the human resources and the financial capacity of local governments in the global South. The challenges that we face are really urgent. And we, as mayors, we have a double advantage because we are very close to those who elect us. Thus, it gives us more legitimacy to push the agenda. Even if we look at the 17 SDGs, they do not happen on the air. They do not happen on a vacuum. These SDGs do happen, and most of them actually do take place at places or regions being managed or led by local institutions. Therefore, the importance of local government is of a paramount importance if we want to push this agenda. I also wanted to recognize the UN and other international organizations for really in the last couple of years for opening spaces for the interaction and for the voices of mayors to be heard. For those like us who, for example, attended COP15 in Copenhagen, I mean, we can recall that there was no place for local governments. But since then, up to COP21 in Paris, we've been seeing that the international community, and in special, the United Nations institutions have been opening up, but we would like to have more space so that we can have a dialogue and directly engage with national governments and with those negotiators so that they can understand in the first hand our priorities and also our challenges. Thank you very much.
So that was our Mayor of Kilimani. Thank you so much for your intervention, sir. It was really great to hear about what's happening in Mozambique. And I think that the same message is coming through again and again of the value of CoMSA for creating space for African cities to have their voice heard, and particularly at a platform like COP, this is critical. I would now like to open the floor up to questions or comments from the crowd. And failing that, I have a few of my own. So would anyone like to ask a question of our panel today? Okay, I don't see any initial questions, so I have a few of my own. The first one I'd like to direct to Mr. Salman Orimba. You were talking earlier around the vulnerability of people in Kisumu County, particularly with rising floods and people having to move away from their areas that they've always been. And as a general rule, we see that the African continent experiences heightened vulnerability to the impacts of climate change. What would you say could be done to ensure this issue remains a top priority at high-level negotiations such as COP26?
Thank you so much, moderator. I think we are in COP26, and we have several conferences in before. We had the Paris Agreement, and most of these agreements and commitments have been on paper. What I'm looking for as a people's representative is action-oriented negotiations that are implementable and geared towards meeting the objectives of the negotiations. So as a county and as members of the local governments and municipal authorities, we would like to see actions taken after agreements have been done so that we can be able to deal conclusively with the issues of climate change. Because if we come to conferences and talk and nothing tangible takes place thereafter in terms of actions following our discussions and negotiations, then we are not doing justice to the mankind. That is what I would like to see moving forward. So as much as the Paris Agreement was very vague, I hope COP26 discussions and negotiations are going to have action, implementable actions, straightforward to the objectives and geared towards meeting the commitments which have been made in COP26. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to invite the Mayor of Bamako to come back onto the stage with us. And while she settles, I have another question for her. Just want to let her get settled. So Deputy Mayor, I wanted to ask you, no, not yet. Okay, we're just sorting out the translation. Are you ready? Okay, great. Wonderful. Sorry about that, everyone. So Deputy Mayor, I wanted to ask you, how can local governments hold their national governments accountable, ensure they undertake comprehensive policy that is inclusive of all stakeholders?
Merci encore, Madame, pour cette question. Comme je l'ai si bien dit, les gouvernements locaux sont vraiment les bénéficiaires de ce programme. Et par rapport à ça, Bamako a priorisé l'adaptation. L'adaptation pour une meilleure résilience des populations afin vraiment de réussir ce projet avec l'accord de Paris dans le cadre du combat contre les changements climatiques. Donc, l'apport des collectivités.
Thank you. I now have a question for Mr. Stefano Signore. This comes from our own team, actually, and we wanted to know, so what are the barriers to increase finance in Africa, and how can these be overcome?
Yes, thank you very much for this question. I think that the first element is certainly to work on the risk appetite of institutional investors, banks, financial institutions, because many times there are programs, there are funds that are made available with a view to be deployed in the African continent. And then we see that, in fact, those funds do not flow in all the countries, but only in some of those where, let's say, there are the best conditions between brackets. And this has to do with, as I said, the risk profile or the risk aversion of many of these institutions, also on their capacity on the ground, because many times they don't have, let's say, boots on the ground. So they tend to go only in those countries where they have country offices or they have, let's say, officials. So we need to work on this. Second point is that, of course, there is the issue of, you know, what all the people are talking about, pipeline of bankable projects. Sometimes there are funds, there are opportunities for green technologies, for renewable energy, for other, let's say, green related sectors. But then what those banks tell us as donors, we don't see sufficient number of projects on the ground. So this is another issue, which of course we can address by mobilizing technical assistance, by paying for studies, you know, by supporting, let's say, the ability of the government, of the authorities to present projects. But of course, there are also things that needs to be done at country level. Typically, regulatory environment, you know, sometimes the regulatory environment is not adapted to the expectations, to the need of investors. And that is why for us, beyond finance, beyond, let's say, talking about finance, what is important is to talk about regulatory environment, policy environment. We see that when the government, the authorities work on policy environment, then more investment flows into the countries or into the sectors. And then the third element is the element of capacity. I think Mayor are the best place to know how important it is to have the human skills, the human capital, the sufficient resources, both in numbers and in quality, that can support, let's say, all those activities, because of course, to do all that requires investment in resources. And as I said, human resources is not something that is ancillary to this conversation, is the crucial part. It's not only about money, but it's also about human resources. That is my three elements that I would flag as the main barriers. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. And as a quick follow-up question, I wanted to ask you, what would you say needs to happen at COP26 to put African voices at the very center of the negotiations?
Well, the negotiations are still ongoing, so we all want to see how things will develop. But I think this COP, and probably also because of the COVID situation, adaptation, resilience are more central to the discussion than perhaps in the past. I don't know if this is sufficient yet, because of course there is always a focus on mitigation, on achieving, mitigation targets. But I think there is a change if we compare to previous COPs, where I see adaptation, resilience more at the center of the conversation and more important for many negotiators. What I can say from our side is that we are mindful of the importance the African countries attached to the adaptation and resilience topic, and we will, let's say, put this also very heart of our programming for the next programming period from 21 to 27 in the European budget. Thanks.
Thank you so much. I have a number of questions here from my team, but I just also wanted to give an opportunity for everyone on the floor. If you had any follow-up questions for everything that you've heard so far, if you'd like to ask a question, we'd like to allow for you to ask our mayors and Stefano here a question. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. I'm Ana Gonzalez, co-founder of Youth Climate Lab, and I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit about how you're engaging young people in your communities. A lot of young people are actually attending this COP for the first time, and as representatives of your constituencies, I would love to know how more you might be engaging young folks in your communities.
Okay. Can I answer the question?
Oh.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I just want to say that, for example, in Kilimani City, we do have a mangrove restoration project because Kilimani is a coastal city and we suffer a lot the influence of climate change, be it via flooding, erosion, or from when we have sea level rise. So what do we normally do? We created what we call environmental and climate change youth clubs. And these youth clubs are in schools, but also are in different locations. So we train them, we educate the youngsters about the importance of mangroves to our city. Actually, the mangroves, they are our first line of defense against erosion to our city. But also because like 60% of our inhabitants get their income from the fishing sector, we also explain to them that cutting mangrove is a very dangerous path, because if you cut and decapitate the mangrove forest, then you are affecting the ecosystem, the place where prawns and other types of crustaceans or fish do reproduce themselves. So it's very important to preserve the mangroves. And then, but of course, the question then becomes, they ask as well, now we understand the importance of the mangroves, but we are so poor that we have no alternative, because they use the mangrove of trees for either as a coal for cooking or to build their houses. So we are working with the youngsters to develop new ways of transforming, for example, waste into biogas, so that this biogas can then replace the coal that comes from the mangroves. But also we partnered with UN Habitat, and we developed a model of resilient houses. These are houses that can be built not using mangroves as before, but using local material, adapted material, so that they stop cutting mangroves. I mean, these are like two examples of how we engage the youth in the climate change challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have another question from the floor, as far as I understand.
Thank you very much. So my name is Georgia Rambelli. I'm part of the Global Covenant of Mayors Secretariat. And I want, first of all, to thank you very much for your intervention and for sharing with us these very inspiring examples of action that you are taking on the ground. My question comes a little bit also from your participation in the Covenant of Mayors initiatives. And in particular, I would like to ask you, what do you think is the greatest added value of this type of community of cities that are all like-minded with similar objectives and purposes and missions? What do you think this cooperation can bring internationally with other cities all over the world? And in particular, is there any priority that you see in terms of themes or sectors where you would like to exchange more with other cities around the world? Thank you.
Thank you. Allow me to just, first of all, go back and respond to our engagement to the young generations. As you could be aware, any establishment or any government that is not paying attention to the youth, then that's a government that is headed toward the wrong direction. So paying attention to the youth is one of our key priorities and objectives towards programs designed to engage the youth so that we can be able to give them some ideas on how they need to move forward and help us in ways of innovation. We encourage the youth first in the cleanup exercises, and we do what we call bringing the youths up to become our environmental ambassadors and champions. We engage them in activities such as mitigation measures, planting of trees, and also solid waste management in terms of trying to recyclable materials. So we look at it from a business point of view, so that as they are helping us in the planting of trees, we are able to facilitate their programs and also give them some kind of an activity that is of economic value in nature. Two, we expose them to other stakeholders in terms of initiatives and innovations in regards to the recyclable materials, so that they can be able to actually widen their scope of exposure. And lastly, I want to answer the issue of interventions, participation as local governments, and how we can be able to see whether we have priorities that we can be able to share. As Association of Local Governments in the Sub-Saharan Africa, I want to say that this is a good forum for us to share our best practices and benchmark. Two, it is a good forum for us to do capacity building amongst ourselves and see how we can be able to improve the livelihoods of our people within various cities from where we come from. And lastly, as we continue to engage the stakeholders, we open up business opportunities amongst ourselves, among the African local government countries, so that we can be able to bring in investors who can be able to have and create opportunity for employment of our people. And finally, as we move forward in a global manner, we can be able to have some of the markets, we create market for the manufacturing industry and investments within our various cities and local government and municipal authorities. Finally, if we engage the innovators, we build on science. And any program that is based on scientific findings is much more sustainable than if it is not built on scientific findings. Thank you.
Merci. Donc, je souhaiterais réagir sur la question posée par rapport à l'implication des jeunes. Donc, c'est juste pour dire que dans ma communication, j'ai parlé de la connexion entre le plan d'action pour le changement climatique, le plan climat avec les PDCEC. Les PDCEC sont les programmes de développement socio-économique qui sont des programmes élaborés depuis la base et qui prennent en compte les préoccupations de toutes les couches. Donc, secteur économique, social et culturel, c'est pour vous dire que les aspirations des jeunes sont prises en compte depuis l'élaboration de ce PDCEC et qui sont vraiment désormais en cohérence avec le plan d'action pour le plan climat de la ville de Bamako. Donc, c'est pour rassurer celle qui a posé la question, pour dire que vraiment, les jeunes ne sont pas obligés, ne sont pas oubliés dans ce plan d'action qui est en lien avec nos PDCEC. Maintenant, par rapport à la question pour la valeur ajoutée, je dirais que la CoM SSA va créer une opportunité pour les gouvernements locaux vraiment de créer un cadre d'échange et surtout vraiment la possibilité d'offrir des opportunités de création, d'investissement de nos différents projets en lien avec les changements climatiques. Merci.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. This is unfortunately all we have time for today, but I would like to thank each and every one of you for being a part of this session today. I think we can all agree that from what we've heard today, the CoM SSA is a real player on the global forum and offers a real opportunity for African voices to not only be heard, but as the Deputy Mayor just said here, an opportunity for local governments to create a framework, an opportunity for challenges and lessons learned to be shared, for best practices to be shared between, and through all of us, an opportunity to improve livelihoods through the opportunity of climate change actions, creating green jobs and real change on the ground. We really have heard about the significance of the CoM SSA initiative and how African cities and local governments are enabled to achieve their action through this initiatives. We've heard some of the expectations from our mayors and esteemed colleagues around the expected outcomes of the negotiations at COP26 and the implications for African cities. Not only are our city leaders providing insights into their climate action, but they're also indicating what is lacking on the global stage. It is clear now more than ever that work is really needed to unlock the finance for sustainable infrastructure, for climate change adaptation, for energy access and nature-based solutions. The CoM SSA Secretariat is excited to launch the first evidence-based report today entitled Data Talks. What data do local governments really need to plan effectively for climate change? This report reviews and summarizes what data are needed for local governments to effectively plan for climate change, how this data are used and for what purpose. It also highlights the challenges faced in data-scarce regions across Africa and showcases some innovative solutions to these challenges. The The report can be used by local governments and associated partners to innovate around climate action planning and implementation. We are hopeful that this session has shown that through collective action, the needs of these African leaders are brought to the fore at COP26. The focus on African cities is especially important, and these messages will be carried forward to COP27, which will be hosted in 2022 in Africa. I would like to convey my sincere thanks to all of the panelists today, as well as all of those who've participated in the session today, both virtually and on the ground. I would also like to thank the generous support of the European Commission, GIZ, and ACID, without whom this event would not have been possible. Please continue to stay in touch with us with CoMSA and follow us on Twitter. Thank you very much to everyone, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.